Resolved to obey God's rules. Are you resolved? Hi, I'm Dr. Andrew Marquez, and this is the Baptist on the Bible podcast. Here is your 7 at 7 devotion, a 7-minute encouragement from Scripture, offered every Monday and Friday at 7 a.m. Today we're going to continue our series called Into Exile, and we are pulling from Daniel chapter 1. Last time we looked at how important it was for Christians to remember that God is in control in the midst of hard times. God is sovereign. Today we're going to look at how Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, or their Hebrew names, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, along with Daniel, how these four men responded to the challenges that came being incorporated into a foreign nation as servants to a foreign king who worshiped foreign gods. It is a remarkable test that they endure, and I think we have a lot that we can learn from their test as we go into the Scripture. So let's go ahead and read together, and then we'll dig into the text to see what we can learn. From Daniel chapter 1, beginning at verse 8. But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's delicacies, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the chief of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. Now God had brought Daniel into favor and goodwill of the chief of the eunuchs. And the chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who has appointed your food and drink. For why should he see your faces looking worse than the young men who are your age? Then you would endanger my head before the king. So Daniel said to the steward, whom the chief of the eunuchs had set over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, Please test your servants for 10 days, and let them give us vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let our appearance be examined before you, and the appearance of the young men who eat the portion of the king's delicacies. And as you see fit, so deal with your servants. So he consented with them in this matter, and tested them 10 days. And at the end of 10 days, their features appeared better and fatter in flesh than all the young men who ate the portion of the king's delicacies. Thus the steward took away their portion of delicacies and the wine that they were to drink, and gave them vegetables. Isn't that a great story? I mean, we have these four young men, very young, taken from their homes, and in order to serve God, they come up with a solution. And so they are resolved to observe God's rules. And that's the main theme. Are you resolved to follow God? God's ways will set his people apart, and they always have. When Christians want to kind of make peace with the world and blend in, usually that means that they have to choose between serving the world or serving God. It doesn't always mesh very well. In fact, usually it doesn't mesh at all. We have to choose to follow God's rules, and that will set us apart. What Daniel and his friends did is they refused defilement. They refused to be defiled in two ways. One was ceremonial. They were forbidden to eat the meat, likely because it was offered to gods. It's ceremonial, and it is a moral offense, because in taking part of these things, it would be almost affirming the value of the gods to whom these meats were often set aside for, or the wine was often offered to. And so they weren't going to be part of the ceremonies of the Babylonian religion, nor part of the worship of that religion. And of course, this is troublesome. This is problematic because that is the norm of the culture, that you would just kind of be part of this great system where we offered thanks and we ate the food that came from the gods we worshiped. And so they refused to do this. They are rebels with a cause. They're going to rebel against this test because God has called them to a higher account. They still have to find a way in exile to retain their identity. And one of the ways God has held his people together is he's given us a way to live that identifies us as his people. And the church is no less unique than ancient Israel was in the way that we live our lives in such a way that the world looks and says, you're like us, but you're not like us. You are different. So refuse defilement. Then search for a solution. How can we interact with the world in such a way that we don't allow ourselves to become defiled, and yet we can still be engaged with the culture and influencing it for God? The solution that Daniel comes up with is a 10-day test. They will eat only the things that grow from seed. The Aramaic word is zeoah, or zera in Hebrew. It means to eat only fruit, vegetables, or grains, or anything produced from its own seed. And so this is a great opportunity for them to be certain that what they're eating is not being used in a way to honor false gods. And so it is more strict than the Jewish kosher diet requires, and they're willing to have a greater strict enforcement upon themselves in order to not risk the chance of defiling themselves. And isn't that interesting? They go above and beyond what they would be required to do by the law. And this is because they're not sure where the food's coming from, but they know if they restrict themselves this tightly, they'll be okay. And so isn't that interesting? Do you as a Christian ever try to think, how careful can I be? How holy can I be? Or are we usually looking for a loophole to find out how close to the world can I get without betraying God's trust? It's a different mindset. Finally, have faith in God's favor. Notice what the Bible tells us. In Exodus 26, God says he will show loving kindness to the thousands, to those who love me and keep my commandments. Daniel seems to be very confident that the test that he has offered will reveal success, that these 4 men will actually come out better than the other men, even though they're eating food that may not be as nutritious in the mind of the culture. But the result is, at the end, the actual Aramaic is that they were fatter than all the other boys, that they are actually going to be more glorious. That's the same word in Hebrew, glory, fat. They are blessed by God through their actions. And so this is great confidence that Daniel has that God is not going to let them down. And he bases this on the promises that he has, that God promises to love his people, to show love to them, to favor them because they keep his commandments. Do you have that same faith? Are you resolved to follow God's rules? Will you refuse the defilement that the world offers? Will you search for good solutions to be a witness? Will you hold to favor of God? Will you trust in that? Do you have faith? I hope you will. I hope you're encouraged. God bless and take care.